Chapter 1. A Death at the Gala. The grand ballroom of Clarendon Manor had been a picture of elegance before the tragedy struck. Gilded chandeliers cast a golden glow over the attendees, the air fragrant with imported roses, and the delicate spice of expensive colognes. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb's charity gala had drawn London's elite, diplomats, socialites, and a few dubious aristocrats whose fortunes were as mysterious as their pasts. Among them was Philip Arkwright, a man of quiet power in the world of fine art dealings. Known for his calculating mind and an unwillingness to part with a single shilling more than necessary, Arkwright had built his reputation on secrecy and suspicion. Yet for all his guarded nature, it seemed there was something he had not revealed, not to his peers, not even to those closest to him. Because that evening, a man who looked exactly like him had walked into the ballroom. It had started as a murmur, a ripple of unease moving through the party. Guests turned, whispered, pointed. Two men, identical in every way, stood just feet apart. One, Mr. Arkwright, nursing a glass of port with his usual detached expression. The other, an impossible duplicate, scanning the room with an air of quiet amusement. Then, the lights flickered, a brief darkness, a collective gasp. When the light returned, Philip Arkwright was dead. He lay crumpled at the base of the grand staircase, his face frozen in an expression of shock. A thin crimson thread of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, staining the pristine marble. And the twin, the impossible man, was gone. Poirot arrives. It was precisely 27 minutes later when Hercule Poirot arrived at Clarendon Manor, stepping out of a sleek black car with the kind of deliberation that suggested he was arriving at a private appointment rather than a crime scene. His immaculate grey suit bore not a single crease, and his polished shoes gleamed in the gaslight of the estate's grand entrance. At his side, Captain Arthur Hastings struggled to adjust his coat, his face still bearing the bewildered expression he had worn since reading about the incident in the evening papers. "Poirot," Hastings said as they approached the grand doors, "this may be the most bizarre murder yet. A dead man and a missing twin. But Arkwright didn't have a twin." Poirot merely raised an eyebrow, tapping his gloved fingers together. "Ah, mon ami, that is what makes this so fascinating. If a man has a twin, but no one knew he existed, then we must ask, was he truly a twin at all?" Before Hastings could question him further, Chief Inspector Japp appeared at the doorway, his expression one of mild exasperation. "About time you showed up, Poirot. We've got a room full of London's finest in a state of hysteria, a body that doesn't make sense, and a witness who swears the dead man spoke his own name before collapsing." Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign that he was intrigued. "Curious indeed, mon cher Japp. But tell me, have you considered the true question?" Japp sighed. "And what's that?" Poirot smiled, his eyes shining with sharp amusement. "Not who killed Philip Arkwright, but rather, who was he killed in place of?" Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. Hercule Poirot stepped into the grand entrance hall of Clarendon Manor, his sharp green eyes sweeping the room with the precision of a man cataloguing every detail, no matter how insignificant it seemed. Oud's air still carried the scent of perfume, cigar smoke, and something far less pleasant. The lingering tension of a murder freshly committed. Captain Hastings followed closely, rubbing his hands together against the slight chill. "Hey, it's a ghastly business, Poirot," he muttered, casting a glance toward the grand staircase, where Philip Arkwright's lifeless body still lay, his face frozen in what seemed to be a mixture of shock and terror. Chief Inspector Japp stood over the corpse, flipping through a small black notebook. "The body hasn't been moved," he said as he noticed Poirot approaching. "And the medical examiner is on his way, but from the looks of it, there's no sign of an external wound, just a bit of blood at the mouth." Poirot knelt carefully, his hands folded behind his back, and examined the body closely. The dead man's tuxedo was immaculate, save for a small wrinkle at the lapel. His hand clutched a silk handkerchief, monogrammed with an elegant P.A. Poirot gently touched the man's left shoe, noting that it was scuffed. Curious for a man of such refined taste. "Japp," Poirot murmured, "you say there is no wound, but tell me, does a man who dies of natural causes often have such an expression upon his face?" Japp grunted. "I don't like it either, but we won't know for sure what did him in until the post-mortem." Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder. "You don't think he was poisoned, do you?" Poirot slowly rose to his feet, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. The trickery of poison would certainly explain the lack of visible injury, but there is something else here, mon ami. Something that does not quite fit. Hastings frowned. "What's that?" Poirot turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping the assembled guests. The reactions of the witnesses. "Observe, Hastings. Who among them is truly afraid?" The guests of Clarendon Manor Inn, a lavish drawing room. The remaining guests of the gala were gathered, their faces pale, their voices hushed with unease. Every person in that room had witnessed the impossible. Philip Arkwright's death and the eerie presence of his identical twin. Poirot surveyed the room methodically, his gaze darting from one guest to another, measuring every flicker of expression, every nervous tick. There was Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, the hostess, her gloved hands clutching a pearl necklace so tightly her knuckles had turned white. A woman of stature and elegance, she had been a patron of the arts for decades. Beside her stood Rupert Langley, a wiry man in his 50s, with a pinched expression and restless fingers that drummed against his glass of brandy. A financier with extensive dealings in the art world, he had worked closely with Arkwright on several lucrative acquisitions. Near the window, a young woman dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Miss Veronica Arkwright, the victim's distant cousin, and his sole living relative. She was pale, shaken, her deep red gown relative. She was pale, shaken, her deep red gown a stark contrast against her ivory skin. To her left, Dr. Alistair Montague, a physician with sharp blue eyes and an impeccable white dinner jacket, observed the room with clinical detachment. He was known for his keen intellect and an unfortunate tendency toward arrogance. And finally, Charles Pembroke, an art historian, whose reputation was as pristine as his bespoke suit. He stood stiffly by the fireplace, his fingers wrapped around his gold-rimmed spectacles, his eyes betraying an emotion Poirot could not yet place. The first questions Lady Eleanor was the first to speak as Poirot entered the room. "Monsieur Poirot, this is a nightmare," she whispered. "Philip, he was a difficult man, yes, but to be murdered here in my home, it is unthinkable." Poirot offered her a small reassuring nod. "Madame, if you please, I shall ask only a few questions for now. It is important, n'est-ce pas, to understand what was seen." He turned his gaze upon Miss Veronica Arkwright, whose eyes were rimmed red. "Mademoiselle, I understand that you are Mr. Arkwright's cousin." She gave a weak nod. "Yes, but we were not close. Philip, he was a private man." Her voice trembled slightly. "I hardly knew him." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "you attended this gala. Did he invite you?" She hesitated. "No. I was invited by Lady Eleanor. Never expected Philip to be here." Poirot let that pass for the moment. He turned to Rupert Langley. "Monsieur Langley, I understand you had business dealings with the deceased." Langley's lips tightened into a thin line. "We worked together on occasion, yes. But Arkwright was a ruthless man. He had no loyalty to anyone but himself." Whoa, raised an eyebrow. "You imply that he had enemies?" Langley's hand twitched slightly. "I don't know what you mean." Poirot said nothing, merely let his silence stretch until Langley looked away. Next, he addressed Dr. Montague. "Doctor, you were present in the ballroom when Mr. Arkwright collapsed, were you not?" The doctor nodded. "Yes. It was quite sudden. One moment he was standing at the base of the stairs, looking, well, startled. Then he clutched his chest, made a strangled sound, and collapsed." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You did not attempt to revive him?" Montague exhaled, his expression one of irritation. "I examined him immediately. There was nothing to be done. He was dead within seconds." Poirot glanced at Charles Pembroke, who had remained quiet. "And you, Monsieur Pembroke, did you see the so-called twin?" Pembroke pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Yes, at least, I thought I did. It was terribly odd. Philip Arkwright standing by the staircase, yet another man, identical to him, just beyond the crowd." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Did anyone speak to this mysterious twin?" Pembroke hesitated. Well, I don't know. The lights went out only moments later." A silence settled over the group. Poirot tapped his fingers against his chin, his mind already working through the contradictions. The missing twin Hastings shifted uncomfortably. "Poirot, what do you make of it? A man who didn't have a twin suddenly does, and now he's dead." Poirot folded his arms. "Consider, mon ami, was there ever a twin at all?" Hastings blinked, but everyone saw him. Poirot tilted his head. "Did they? Or did they see what they thought they saw?" Lady Eleanor gasped. "You mean an impersonation?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps. Or perhaps something more clever still." Japp strode into the room, just then, a piece of paper in hand. "Well, Poirot, here's something interesting. The staff checked the guest list. No twin brother, no look-alike. But they found this in Arkwright's coat pocket." He handed Poirot the paper. Poirot unfolded it, his sharp eyes scanning the single line of text. "You should not have come tonight. You know why." Poirot turned the note over. No signature, no identifying marks. He smiled, faintly. "Ah, mon cher Japp, I believe we are dealing with a most peculiar game indeed." Japp sighed. "Let me guess, you already have a theory?" Poirot tilted his head. "Mais oui, mon ami. But first, let us discover who, precisely, was Philip Arkwright." Chapter 3. The shadow in the mirror. The gathering of suspects had provided Poirot with much to consider. Yet the most tantalizing question still remained. Had Philip Arkwright truly seen his twin before his death? As Poirot paced the drawing room, his hands clasped behind his back, Hastings watched him with a mixture of admiration and frustration. "Poirot," he said, lowering his voice, "you don't mean to say this whole business about a twin is an illusion? Everyone at the gala saw the man." Poirot arched an eyebrow. "Ah, mon ami, what the eyes see and what the mind believes are two separate matters. Consider, if you were to look into a mirror and see a shadow that should not be there, would you not believe in ghosts?" Hastings frowned. "Well, if I saw it, précisément. The power of suggestion, Hastings. It can make people believe even the most impossible of things." Poirot turned to Japp. "Chief Inspector, let us first confirm something very simple. Have your men found any record of Philip Arkwright having a twin?" Japp sighed and pulled out his notebook. "Check the registry, check the birth records. No twin. Philip Arkwright was an only child. No long-lost brother, no illegitimate sibling. Whatever this other Philip was, he wasn't family." Poirot nodded as if he had expected this. "And what of his personal effects? Did he receive any letters, telegrams, or calls before the gala?" Japp flipped through a few more pages. "We checked his suite. Nothing unusual, except that one note I gave you earlier. You should not have come tonight. You know why. Other than that, his correspondence seems ordinary. Business dealings, some exchanges with art dealers. Nothing to suggest a threat." Poirot stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "No apparent enemies, yet a warning. No twin, yet a room full of witnesses who saw one. Tell me, Japp, did you find anything in his personal belongings that might suggest he was expecting someone?" Japp hesitated. "Funny you ask. His valet said Arkwright asked him to press an extra tuxedo before the gala, but no one saw him bring a second guest." Poirot's eyes brightened. "An extra tuxedo?" Japp nodded. "An extra tuxedo?" Japp nodded. "Exactly like the one he was wearing when he died. Perfectly identical." "Curieux," Poirot murmured. "The mirror image of himself, prepared in advance. Tell me, Japp, was this second tuxedo found?" Japp's expression darkened. "No, it's missing. A room left." Undisturbed, the trio, Poirot, Hastings, and Japp, made their way upstairs to Philip Arkwright's private suite, a luxurious corner room on the second floor of Clarendon Manor. The moment they entered, Poirot's sharp eyes flitted over the surroundings. A mahogany desk stood against the far wall, covered with neatly arranged papers and correspondence. The four-poster bed was untouched. its silk sheets still perfectly smoothed over. A gold pocket watch rested atop the bedside table, alongside a small glass of water that had not been touched. Poirot moved to the wardrobe, where a selection of finely tailored suits hung, each pressed to perfection. But one space was noticeably empty. "Jap," Poirot murmured, gesturing toward the gap between two jackets. "The missing tuxedo. It was kept here, yes?" Jap nodded. "The valet confirmed it," said Arkwright, made a point of setting it aside himself before the party. Poirot's fingers lightly touched the wooden hanger, still hanging in place. "And yet, it is gone." Hastings let out a low whistle. "Poirot, do you think someone stole it? Or—" He hesitated. "Do you think Arkwright gave it to someone?" Poirot gave a small smile. "Mon cher Hastings, I do not think I know." Jap crossed his arms. "You mean he expected this impostor? What kind of game was he playing?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped toward the mirror above the dresser and examined its polished surface. He reached forward, running a gloved finger along its edge, then turned back to Jap. "You say Philip Arkwright had no twin, but consider this, mes amis. What if he had a double?" Hastings blinked. "A double? An impostor?" Poirot clarified. "Someone who looked strikingly similar to him, enough to be mistaken for his twin, especially in dim lighting, among guests who had been drinking champagne." Jap scowled. "So you think Arkwright knew someone was going to impersonate him? Why the devil wouldn't he tell anyone?" Poirot smiled. "That, Chief Inspector, is precisely what we must uncover." A curious disappearance. Before they could delve further, there was a knock at the door. A constable entered, looking slightly out of breath. "Inspector Jap, sir. We've got a situation." Jap frowned. "What now?" The medical examiner just finished his initial assessment of Arkwright's body. No stab wounds, no gunshot wounds, no obvious signs of trauma. But here's the strange part. There's no trace of poison in his system either. Poirot's expression did not change, but Hastings could see a spark of intense interest in his eyes. "No poison," Hastings repeated. "Then, what did kill him?" The constable shifted uncomfortably. "The doctor says it looks like he collapsed from shock." Hastings gaped. Shock? But what could have frightened him so much that it killed him? Poirot's voice was smooth, deliberate. "Ah, Hastings, do you not see? Monsieur Arkwright was a man of logic, of calculation. What if, in his final moments, he saw something so impossible that his mind could not accept it?" Jap scratched his head. "You're suggesting he saw something, what? Supernatural?" Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami. Not supernatural, but something unnatural. The missing guest." Just as Poirot finished speaking, another constable rushed in. "Sir, we've searched every room, every corridor. There's no sign of the second Philip Arkwright anywhere." Hastings glanced at Poirot. "He vanished." Poirot exhaled, his gaze flickering toward the missing tuxedo's empty space. "Non, mon ami. He did not vanish. He was never truly here." Hastings frowned. "But he was here. People saw him." Poirot gave Hastings an indulgent smile. "They saw what they were meant to see." Jap threw up his hands. "You're talking in circles, Poirot. If he wasn't here, then where the devil is the missing tuxedo?" Poirot's lips pressed together. That, Chief Inspector, is the question we must answer. And I believe we must do so quickly. For you see, mes amis, whoever wore that tuxedo last may have been the only person in this house who truly knew why Philip Arkwright had to die. Japp's eyes narrowed. Then I'd say we have a murderer on the loose. Poirot's expression turned grave. Mais oui, and if my suspicions are correct, mon cher Japp, this murderer is not finished yet. Chapter 4. The Second Disappearance. A heavy silence settled over the room as Poirot's words lingered in the air. Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his mind grappling with the detective's implications. A murderer on the loose, he echoed. But if this impostor disappeared into thin air, how do we find him? For all we know, he's already miles away. Japp crossed his arms, his brow furrowed in irritation. Or still hiding under our noses. We've got constables watching every exit. No one has left since the body was found. Poirot remained still, his hands steepled as he considered the facts. Then, mes amis, our murderer is still here. But do not assume he or she will remain passive. No, I fear we have yet to see the full extent of their plan. Japp sighed, rubbing his temples. Just what I needed. Another cryptic prophecy from you, Poirot. Poirot simply smiled. Not a prophecy, mon cher Japp. A calculation, and unless we move swiftly, I suspect we shall soon have another crime on our hands. A new development. Before Japp could argue, the door burst open and a constable rushed inside, breathless. Inspector, he gasped, there's been another. He hesitated, his eyes darting to Poirot and Hastings. Spit it out, man, Japp snapped. A disappearance, sir. Japp's entire demeanor changed. Who's missing? Miss Evelyn Harcourt, sir. One of the guests from the gala. No one had seen her since last night. Her bed hasn't been slept in, and her maid swears she never returned to her room. Hastings felt a chill crawl down his spine. Evelyn Harcourt. But she was one of the last people to speak with Arkwright before he died. Poirot nodded gravely. And therefore, she was one of the last people to see the impostor. See the impostor? Japp straightened. Right. We'll search every inch of this house. If she's hiding something, we'll find her. But Poirot raised a hand. Nah, Chief Inspector. You misunderstand. Miss Harcourt is not hiding. She has been taken. A hush fell over the room. Taken. Hastings repeated, his voice hoarse. By whom? Poirot's gaze was unreadable. By the same person who wished Philip Arkwright dead. The question, mon ami, is whether she is still alive to tell us why. A clue. In the garden, Japp wasted no time in ordering a full search of the estate. Every guest room, corridor, and locked chamber was combed through, but there was no trace of Evelyn Harcourt. It was not until nearly an hour later that a nervous constable approached them outside the manor, his face pale. Sir, we found something in the gardens. The three men followed the constable toward the rose garden at the rear of the estate. The early morning mist had settled over the hedges, giving the entire scene an eerie stillness. The constable led them to a small secluded alcove, where the dew-damp grass had been disturbed. Poirot knelt, his sharp eyes scanning the ground. The remains of a crushed wineglass lay near the bench, its shattered pieces glinting in the faint sunlight. A silk shawl, Evelyn Harcourt's shawl, was draped over the backrest. Hastings felt his stomach twist. She was here. Poirot picked up a single fragment of glass, rolling it between his gloved fingers. Oui, mon ami. And something startled her. Japp examined the area. If she struggled, there should be footprints, but I don't see any signs of a fight. Poirot gestured toward the damp earth beneath the bench. Observe, Chief Inspector, the ground here is soft, yet there is no impression of a person lying down. If Miss Harcourt had fallen unconscious, we would see the imprint of her body. Hastings frowned. Then what are you suggesting? Poirot's voice was firm. She was taken, Hastings, but not by force. She either left willingly, or was made to believe she should. Japp let out a frustrated sigh. You mean she knew her attacker? Poirot stood, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. Perhaps. Or perhaps our murderer is so clever that they convinced her they were someone else entirely. The guest list mystery. The growing unease within Clarendon Manor had turned the once lively gala guests into fearful whisperers. The disappearance of Evelyn Harcourt had sent ripples of anxiety through the remaining attendees, and none seemed eager to remain within the house any longer than necessary. Poirot, however, had other plans. He returned to the grand ballroom, where the gala had taken place just the night before. The chandeliers had been dimmed, and the polished floor now seemed eerily empty. He approached the guest list, which had been carefully maintained by the evening's host. His fingers trailed down the elegant script, pausing briefly before he turned to Japp. Tell me, Chief Inspector, how many guests did you count last night? Japp frowned. 87, including the staff. Why? Poirot's expression did not change, but Hastings could see the unmistakable gleam in his eyes, the one that meant he had found something. Curious, Poirot murmured, tapping the parchment. Because the official guest list only accounts for 86. Hastings straightened. What? You mean someone was here who wasn't invited? Exactement, mon ami. Poirot said softly. A person who did not belong, yet moved so seamlessly among the crowd that no one questioned them. Japp swore under his breath. The impostor. Poirot's lips curled into a small knowing smile. And perhaps the same person who now has Evelyn Harcourt in their grasp. A dangerous gamble. Hours passed with no sign of the missing woman. The tension inside the manor had reached an unbearable peak. And even Japp, usually the embodiment of unshakable authority, was beginning to show signs of frustration. Hastings found Poirot seated in the drawing-room, a thoughtful frown upon his face. Poirot, you've been quiet for far too long. Do you have a plan? Poirot inclined his head slightly. But of course, Hastings. You see, there is one detail that our murderer did not anticipate. And what's that? Poirot's eyes gleamed. That Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived. He stood abruptly. Come, mon ami. We must set a trap. Japp, who had just entered the room, raised an eyebrow. A trap? What kind of trap? Poirot smoothed the front of his jacket. One designed to draw our killer out of hiding. But first, I require an announcement to be made. Japp scowled. What kind of announcement? Poirot's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. You must inform the guests and staff that the police have found Evelyn Harcourt, and that she is currently being questioned in private. Hastings nearly dropped his teacup. But that's a lie. Poirot's mustache twitched. Ah, mon ami, it is a calculated lie. If our murderer believes Miss Harcourt is alive and speaking to the police, what do you think they will do? Japp's face darkened as he caught on. They'll panic. They'll try to silence her. Poirot nodded. Exactement, and when they do, we shall be waiting. A visitor in the night as evening fell. The tension inside the manor grew thicker. Poirot and Hastings waited inside a darkened side chamber, while Japp had stationed constables near every exit. And then, just past midnight, the trap was sprung. A shadow moved swiftly down the hall, slipping toward the study where Poirot had claimed Evelyn Harcourt was being held. The figure hesitated outside the door, then turned the handle. In a single fluid motion, Poirot stepped forward, the light flickering on. Ah, he murmured. I thought it might be you. The figure froze, caught in the act. Hastings gasped. Good heavens, it's... Chapter 5. The trap springs shut. The study was dimly lit, a single gas lamp casting long shadows across the mahogany-paneled walls. The moment the figure froze, Poirot stepped fully into view, his silhouette crisp and composed. Hastings, standing just behind him, felt his breath catch in his throat. Good heavens, Hastings whispered. It's you. The intruder remained still for a fraction of a second longer, before suddenly whirling around, making a desperate dash. For a fraction of a second longer, before suddenly whirling around, making a desperate dash toward the door. But Japp was faster. The chief inspector lunged forward, gripping the figure's wrist in an iron grasp. Not so fast, sunshine, Japp growled, spinning them back toward the light. The glow of the gas lamp illuminated the face of Lucian Graves, the personal secretary to Lord Clarendon. Hastings stared in astonishment. You, Graves, usually so impeccably composed, was now disheveled, his color askew, and his dark eyes darting wildly between the three men. This is a mistake, he stammered. I was only looking for something. Poirot raised an elegant eyebrow. Oui, Monsieur Graves. You were looking for Miss Harcourt, were you not? Graves swallowed, then let out a nervous chuckle. I don't know what you mean. I simply... Poirot's voice was gentle, but his words were razor-sharp. You thought she was here, n'est-ce pas? Because the police announced that she had been found. Graves's face twitched. But, mon cher, Poirot continued, his voice growing softer, Miss Harcourt was never found. She is still missing, and yet you came here to silence her. A stunned silence filled the room. Japp tightened his grip. You're looking guiltier by the second, Graves. Care to explain yourself? Graves licked his lips, his composure cracking. I had no intention of harming her. I only wanted to speak with her. Speak with a woman who has disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Hastings snapped. That hardly sounds innocent. Graves hesitated. Poirot studied him carefully. The man's demeanor was not one of cold calculation, but of frantic desperation. "Because me, Monsieur Graves," Poirot said at last. "Are you acting out of fear?" Graves exhaled sharply, as though Poirot had struck upon the truth. He said nothing. Poirot turned to Japp. "A search of his personal quarters may be enlightening, Chief Inspector. I suspect our friend here is hiding something." Graves' face paled, but he remained silent as two constables led him away. As the door closed behind them, Hastings turned to Poirot. "Well, do you think he's the killer?" Poirot folded his arms. "No, Hastings. Graves is not a murderer, but he knows more than he lets on." Japp scowled. "So, if he's not our man, why try to break into the study?" Poirot tapped his temple. "Ah, mon ami, because he believes Miss Harcourt is alive. And that," his voice grew quiet, "means that she may yet be found." A hidden letter. The search of Graves' quarters yielded something far more intriguing than expected. Among his neatly arranged correspondence, Poirot found a single, crumpled note, hastily tucked inside a book, on Lord Clarendon's financial dealings. The note read, "I saw what happened. You must meet me at once. No one else can know. The garden. Midnight." There was no signature. Japp cursed under his breath. Looks like Evelyn Harcourt arranged a meeting that night. But with whom? Poirot's fingers traced the paper thoughtfully. It would seem that Miss Harcourt knew something important, and it is likely that knowledge led to her disappearance. Hastings's stomach twisted. "You think she was lured into a trap?" Poirot nodded solemnly. "We, and our murderer is playing a most dangerous game." The secret in the attic with Graves detained for questioning, Poirot turned his attention back to the manor. Something about the architecture of the estate had been bothering him. "Come, Hastings," Poirot announced. "We must investigate the attic." Hastings blinked. The attic? What could possibly be up there? Poirot merely smiled. "That, mon ami, is what we must discover." The upper level of the manor was thick with dust, its wooden beams stretching into darkness. Japp, now accustomed to Poirot's whims, reluctantly followed as they pushed open the creaking attic door. Inside, the space was filled with old furniture trunks and forgotten relics, but Poirot's eyes were drawn to a single wardrobe in the farthest corner. He strode toward it with purpose. "Aha! This, I believe, is what we seek." Hastings frowned. A wardrobe. Poirot ran a gloved hand along its edge before pulling open the doors. Inside hung a row of identical black suits, the same kind Philip Arkwright had been wearing when he died. Japp let out a low whistle. So someone had a disguise prepared in advance. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, Chief Inspector, there is one missing." Japp's expression darkened, meaning the murderer could still be among us, dressed as Arkwright's twin. Poirot nodded. "We. And that means the impostor may strike again." A voice in the dark that night. As Hastings lay in bed, he found himself unable to sleep. Poirot's deductions had set his mind racing. If the murderer had a disguise, could they still be moving freely inside the manor? He turned restlessly, when suddenly A soft knock sounded against his door. His breath caught. The knock was hesitant, almost uncertain. Slowly he rose, reaching for the pistol he kept in his bedside drawer. "Who's there?" he called softly. A pause, then a whisper. "Help me." Hastings' heart pounded. The voice was faint, trembling with fear, but unmistakable. It was Evelyn Harcourt. Chapter 6. The woman who wasn't there for a moment. Hastings was frozen in place, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. The voice outside his door. It was unmistakable, Evelyn Harcourt. But that was impossible. She had vanished without a trace. The entire household had assumed she was either dead or being held captive somewhere. And yet, she was here. Heart pounding, Hastings reached for his pistol, gripping it tightly as he moved toward the door. Slowly, carefully, he turned the handle and pulled it open. The dimly lit corridor stretched before him, lined with heavy wooden doors and antique sconces flickering weakly. But there was no one there. He stepped forward, glancing left and right. "Miss Harcourt," he called softly. Silence. A chill ran down his spine. Had he imagined it? The voice had been real. He was certain of it. He took another cautious step into the hallway, when suddenly a shadow moved. Hastings spun around, raising his pistol instinctively. But he was too late. A cold, gloved hand clamped over his mouth from behind, yanking him backward into the darkness. Behind, yanking him backward into the darkness. Perilous situation. Hastings struggled, trying to break free, but his attacker was strong. The grip tightened, and he felt himself being dragged into a side chamber. Just as he was about to swing his elbow back, the grip released, and he stumbled forward. He whirled around, pistol raised. "Who the devil?" His words caught in his throat. Before him, standing in the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through a tall, narrow window, was Evelyn Harcourt. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale, and her eyes wide with something that could have been fear or desperation. "Good heavens," Hastings breathed. "It really is you." She took a step forward. "You must listen to me, Captain Hastings. I have very little time." Still gripping his pistol, Hastings studied her warily. "Where have you been? Everyone's been looking for you." "Poirot, you must not tell him you saw me," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "Not yet." Hastings frowned. "Not tell Poirot? But why?" She shook her head. "I can't explain, not now. All I can tell you is that the man everyone thinks is dead is not dead at all." Hastings felt the blood drain from his face. "You mean Philip Arkwright?" She nodded. "But not in the way you think. The real Philip Arkwright was never here to begin with." Hastings blinked. "I beg your pardon." Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Evelyn gasped and stepped back into the shadows. "I must go. Please, Captain Hastings, say nothing to Poirot. Not yet." Before Hastings could stop her, she turned and vanished into the darkness. Poirot's insight. The next morning, Hastings sat across from Poirot in the breakfast room, his mind still racing. The detective, impeccably dressed as always, studied him with keen interest. "You are troubled, mon ami," Poirot observed. "Your moustache is most agitated this morning." Hastings started. "My... what?" Poirot gestured delicately. "Your habit, Hastings. You twitch your moustache when something perplexes you. And yet, you have said nothing of importance since you sat down. Why is that?" Hastings hesitated. He had promised Evelyn he would say nothing, but lying to Poirot? That was another matter entirely. He began, then stopped. "Poirot, do you believe in ghosts?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, a most curious question, mon ami. And what prompts it?" Hastings hesitated. "Let us say, if someone believed they had seen a ghost, how would you explain it?" Poirot sipped his tea thoughtfully. "That would depend. Some ghosts are born from guilt, others from fear, and others still from clever deception." He tilted his head. "But I do not think, Hastings, that you ask this out of idle curiosity. Tell me, have you seen a ghost?" Hastings opened his mouth, then closed it again. Evelyn's warning echoed in his mind. He cleared his throat. No, nothing like that. Just a thought, old chap." Poirot did not look convinced. Just then, Japp strode in, looking uncharacteristically grim. "Well, gentlemen, I hope you've had your breakfast, because we've got another corpse on our hands." Poirot set down his tea. He folded his napkin carefully. "And who, pray, is dead this time?" Japp exhaled. "Lucien Graves, found in his cell this morning. Strangled." A killer's reach. The scene at the police station was grim. Lucien Graves lay slumped in the corner of his cell, his neck bruised with the telltale marks of strangulation. "A suicide?" Hastings asked, hesitantly. Japp snorted. "Not a chance. No way to do it to himself, not with these marks. Someone got to him." Poirot knelt, examining the body. He lifted one of Graves's limp hands, studying the fingertips. He murmured. Hastings and Japp exchanged glances. "What is it?" Japp asked. Poirot gently placed the hand down. "The fingernails, Chief Inspector, they are clean." Japp frowned. "And that means—" Poirot stood, dusting off his gloves. "It means, mon cher, that Graves did not fight back. He knew his killer. A revelation in the study back at Clarendon Manor." Poirot paced the study, his mind working furiously. Hastings sat nearby, still wrestling with Evelyn's words. Finally, Poirot stopped and turned to him. "Hastings, I must ask you something most serious." Hastings straightened. "Of course, Poirot. Did you see Evelyn Harcourt last night?" The question struck like a bolt of lightning. Hastings felt his breath hitch. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Mon ami, I ask you once, and once only. If you lie to me, I shall know it." Hastings swallowed. His loyalty to Poirot battled against his promise to Evelyn. Finally he sighed. "Yes, I saw her." Poirot nodded, as if he had already known. "Bon, tell me exactly what she said." Hastings recounted everything. When he was done, Poirot steepled his fingers. "The real Philip Arkwright was never here," he murmured. "What could she mean by that?" Hastings asked. Poirot exhaled. "I suspect, Hastings, that the dead man is not Philip Arkwright at all." Hastings blinked. "Then who is he?" Poirot's eyes glowed with intensity. "That, mon ami, is the question we must answer." and we must answer it quickly, before the killer strikes again. Midnight summons. That night a letter was slipped under Poirot's door. If you want the truth, come alone. The abandoned chapel. Midnight. No signature. Poirot studied the note, then turned to Hastings and Japp. Gentlemen, it seems we are expected. Japp scowled. Sounds like a bloody trap. Poirot smiled. But of course, Chief Inspector. The question is, who is setting it? With that, he folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. Let us find out. Chapter 7. The Abandoned Chapel at Midnight. The air was thick with anticipation as the carriage rattled down the moonlit road. Inside, Chief Inspector Japp shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tapping against his coat pocket, no doubt ensuring his revolver was within reach. Captain Hastings sat stiffly beside him, his expression wary, his thoughts no doubt still dwelling on the words of Evelyn Harcourt. Poirot, however, remained as composed as ever. He sat with his hands delicately clasped, eyes closed, deep in thought. Oozed, deep in thought. Only the occasional twitch of his mustache revealed the rapid calculations whirring in his mind. Poirot, are you certain about this? Hastings finally asked, breaking the silence. This could very well be a trap. Poirot's lips curled into a small smile. May we, Hastings? That is precisely why we must go. A trap, after all, reveals the nature of the one who sets it. Japp grumbled. I don't like it. Meeting a mysterious informant in an abandoned chapel at midnight. Might as well paint a target on our backs. Poirot opened his eyes. And yet, Chief Inspector, here you are, accompanying us. Japp exhaled sharply. Because if I let you go alone, you'd end up finding another dead body, probably yours. Poirot chuckled softly, but said nothing more. The carriage rolled to a stop before a dilapidated structure at the edge of an overgrown cemetery. The chapel, if it could still be called that, was little more than a crumbling ruin. The roof had partially collapsed, its skeletal frame stretching toward the sky like the fingers of some forgotten spectre. Vines crawled up the stone walls, their tendrils creeping through cracks like sinister veins. Hastings shivered. Charming place. I assume ghosts are included in the visit. Japp stepped out first, revolver drawn. Stay close, and keep your wits about you. Poirot followed at a leisurely pace, his gaze sweeping over the scene with methodical precision. We are expected. Let us not keep our host waiting. A meeting with shadows inside. The chapel was eerily silent. Moonlight filtered through the broken, stained glass windows, casting shattered colors onto the stone floor. The scent of damp earth and decayed wood hung in the air. At the far end of the room near the altar, a figure stood cloaked in shadows. Hastings instinctively reached for his pistol, but Poirot held up a hand. Patience, mon ami. Let us not frighten our informant before they have spoken. The figure shifted slightly. Then, in a low voice, it spoke. You were followed. Japp tensed. By whom? The figure shook its head. I do not know. But I heard movement outside as you entered. Poirot took a step forward. You summoned us here, did you not? A pause. Then, yes. Then please, monsieur or madame, reveal yourself, so that we may discuss matters face to face. For a long moment, the figure hesitated. Then, stepping into the pale light, they removed the hood of their cloak. Hastings gasped. It was Evelyn Harcourt. The truth about Philip Arkwright. Hastings had seen her just the night before, but now, standing before them, she looked even more fragile. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes, but cheekbones more pronounced. She clasped her hands tightly together, as though afraid they might betray her trembling. Miss Harcourt, Poirot said gently, you have risked much in coming here. She nodded. And I have little time. Please, listen to me carefully. Japp narrowed his eyes. You'd better start talking, Miss Harcourt. What do you know about Philip Arkwright? Evelyn took a deep breath. The man who was murdered at Clarendon Manor was not Philip Arkwright. Japp's jaw clenched. Then who was he? I don't know his real name, she admitted. But I do know this. He was an impostor. The real Philip Arkwright died many years ago. Hastings gaped. But that's impossible. Lord Clarendon confirmed his identity himself. Evelyn shook her head. Lord Clarendon believed he was Philip Arkwright, yes, but he was deceived. The man who came to Clarendon Manor was playing a role meant to manipulate the old man into changing his will. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, and you knew this because... She hesitated. Because I overheard a conversation. A month ago, I was passing by the study late at night and heard voices. The man posing as Philip Arkwright was arguing with someone, he said. She swallowed. That the old fool had no idea who he really was. Hastings felt a cold chill. Who was he arguing with? Evelyn hesitated. I don't know. I couldn't see. But I believe whoever it was, they killed him. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. That is most probable. Japp folded his arms. Why did you run, Miss Harcourt? Her expression darkened. Because I was afraid. The night before the murder, someone slipped a note under my door. It said, you know too much. Leave, or you'll end up like him. A murder in the shadows. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the chapel. Hastings spun around. What was that? Poirot's face darkened. We are not alone. Japp lifted his gun. Stay behind me. They crept forward, every sense alert. The sound had come from behind the broken pews near the entrance. Japp moved cautiously, stepping around the wooden wreckage. A body lay sprawled on the floor, face down. Japp knelt, pressing 2 fingers to the neck. His face twisted into a grimace. Dead, strangled. Poirot's mustache twitched. Ah, the killer is efficient. Hastings swallowed. Who is it? Japp rolled the body over. Moonlight illuminated the face. Hastings gasped. Good Lord, it's Marcus Wren. Marcus Wren, the lawyer responsible for handling Lord Clarendon's estate. Poirot crouched beside the body, his keen eyes scanning every detail. Chief Inspector, I would advise you to check his pockets. The manner of his death suggests he may have been carrying something someone did not wish him to share. Japp quickly searched Wren's coat. A moment later, he pulled out a crumpled letter. Hastings leaned in. What does it say? Japp unfolded it and read aloud. I have discovered the truth about Arkwright. Meet me at the chapel at midnight. I have evidence that will change everything. There was no signature. Japp exhaled. Well, that settles it. This was a setup. The killer must have followed us, waited for Wren to show up, and silenced him before he could talk. Poirot stood, dusting off his gloves. His expression was unreadable. Yes, mon cher Japp. And that tells us something very important. Japp frowned. What's that? Poirot met his gaze. The killer is someone who knew Marcus Wren would be here tonight. And that means, he turned toward Evelyn. Miss Harcourt, who else did you tell about this meeting? Evelyn's face went pale. No one. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Ah, but someone knew all the same. Hastings felt a creeping sense of dread. Poirot? Do you mean to say? Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Oui, mon ami. The killer is much closer than we think. The chapel fell silent. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the broken windows, a watchful presence lingered. The game was far from over. Chapter 8. A clue, written in shadows. The stillness of the abandoned chapel was shattered by the weight of revelation. The body of Marcus Wren, the lawyer responsible for handling Lord Clarendon's estate, lay sprawled upon the damp stone floor, his face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. Evelyn Harcourt stood trembling, her hands clasped to her chest, while Hastings swallowed hard, his mind struggling to piece together the implications of what they had just uncovered. Poirot, ever composed, knelt beside the lifeless form, his sharp eyes studying every minute detail. Chief Inspector Japp kept his revolver raised, scanning the darkness for any movement, his jaw clenched in frustration. Blast it all, Japp muttered under his breath. We were so close. If Wren had lived just a few minutes longer, he could have told us everything. Poirot let out a quiet hum. Ah, but mon cher Japp, even in death, a man may yet speak, if one is willing to listen carefully. Japp grunted. And what exactly is the dead man telling you, Poirot? Without answering immediately, Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver magnifying glass. He ran it over the stiffened fingers of the corpse. Then, just as Hastings was about to ask what he was looking for, Poirot pointed. Regardez, mes amis, he said, his voice laced with certainty. The fingertips, do you see it? Hastings and Japp leaned in. At first glance, they saw nothing unusual, but then, under the moonlight streaming through the shattered stained glass window, they noticed it. A faint smudge of ink on Wren's left index finger. Good Lord, Hastings whispered. He wrote something before he died. Japp cursed. But where? There's nothing in his pockets except that letter. Poirot's gaze swept the room, his mind working at lightning speed. Then his eyes settled upon the stone floor beside Wren's body. He stood abruptly and stepped over the corpse. And there, scrawled in a shaky, near-invisible script upon the dust-covered ground, were a few letters smudged by hurried strokes. Japp crouched, squinting at the writing. Looks like and something else, but it's smeared. Poirot's mustache twitched. It seems Mr. Wren attempted to write a final message before succumbing to death. Evelyn Harcourt, still pale as a ghost, took a shaky breath. It could be a name. Japp rubbed his chin. Maybe. Could be Leonard or Lewis. Or something else entirely. Poirot examined the dust closely, his keen mind processing possibilities. "Non, Chief Inspector. I do not believe it is a name. Instead, I believe Mr. Wren was trying to lead us somewhere." Hastings frowned. "Where?" Poirot stepped back, gesturing towards the crumbling chapel walls. "The answer, Hastings, is hidden in the architecture itself. You see, the word begins with L-E-U. What if it is part of something larger?" His eyes flickered to a half-collapsed archway at the back of the chapel, covered in ivy and forgotten by time. Above it, weathered and faint, was a Latin inscription carved into the stone. The letters, though worn, were still legible. Legatus. Japp straightened. Legatus, that's Latin, isn't it? Poirot nodded. "Yes, Chief Inspector. It means envoy or messenger. But in this case, it could be referring to something else entirely." Hastings furrowed his brow. But why would Marcus Wren write "the" in the dust? What was he trying to tell us? Poirot gave a knowing smile. "Patience, mon ami. Let us investigate, n'est-ce pas?" The hidden crypt with lanterns in hand, the group carefully navigated the broken remains of the chapel. The ivy-covered archway loomed before them, its edges crumbling with age. Japp, ever the pragmatist, tested the stones with his hands. This thing's ancient. Could collapse any second. Poirot stepped forward, brushing away the ivy, his fingers tracing the outline of a symbol carved into the stone. A crest, almost imperceptible beneath centuries of erosion. Then he found it. A hidden lever embedded within the wall. "Stand back, mes amis," he murmured. With a precise motion, he pulled. A deep groan of shifting stone echoed through the chapel as the archway creaked open, revealing a dark passageway leading underground. Hastings let out a low whistle. Good heavens, a hidden crypt! Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "Indeed, Hastings, and I believe we are about to uncover something very important." Japp muttered a curse and tightened his grip on his revolver. "If this place is some kind of death trap, I'm blaming you, Poirot." Poirot merely smiled. They descended carefully, their lanterns casting flickering shadows against damp stone walls. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of old parchment and decay. And then they saw it. A stone coffin, untouched for decades, sat at the center of the chamber. And upon its lid, the name Philip Arkwright was carved in elegant script. Hastings' breath caught. "But that's impossible. Philip Arkwright was just murdered." Japp's face darkened. Or maybe Miss Harcourt was telling the truth all along. Maybe the real Philip Arkwright has been dead for years. Poirot nodded, running a gloved hand over the inscription. "Yes, Chief Inspector, I believe this coffin holds the remains of the true Philip Arkwright." Evelyn shuddered. "Then, who was the man at Clarendon Manor?" Poirot exhaled slowly. "An impostor? A man who assumed the identity of a dead twin, but who made one fatal mistake." Hastings turned. "And what was that?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. He underestimated the intelligence of those around him. The final revelation. Japp ran a hand through his hair. If the real Philip Arkwright has been dead for years, then the man who was murdered at Clarendon Manor was a fraud. That means this whole inheritance scheme was built on a lie. Poirot nodded. Oui, Chief Inspector. The impostor's goal was simple: convince Lord Clarendon he was his long-lost heir and secure the family. Convince Lord Clarendon he was his long-lost heir and secure the family fortune. But someone, perhaps Marcus Wren, discovered the deception and sought to expose him. Hastings frowned. So the murderer silenced Wren before he could talk. Precisely. Poirot gestured toward the coffin. And now we have the final proof. The real Philip Arkwright lies here, entombed for years. The impostor played his role well, but in the end, the truth has a way of rising from the shadows. Japp exhaled heavily. And now, we need to figure out who was pulling the strings behind all this. Poirot's mustache twitched. Do not worry, Chief Inspector. The murderer has made one final mistake. Japp raised an eyebrow. Which is? Poirot smiled. They did not count on Hercule Poirot uncovering the truth. As the weight of the discovery settled over them, a sound echoed from above. Footsteps. Someone was in the chapel. Japp immediately raised his revolver. Stay here, I'll handle this. Poirot, however, remained calm. No, Chief Inspector. Let us see who our visitor is. After all, I believe we are about to have a most interesting confrontation. The air grew tense as they turned toward the entrance. Off the crypt, a shadow loomed at the top of the stairs, and then, a voice, cold and filled with menace. You should not have come here. Chapter 9. The Unmasked Deceiver. A tense silence hung in the crypt as the shadow at the entrance shifted, stepping forward into the dim lantern light. The voice had been unmistakably laced with menace. But now, as the figure revealed itself, the tension sharpened like the blade of a dagger. It was Lucian Graves, the family solicitor, always the picture of composure, now stood at the top of the ancient staircase, his usually impeccable suit slightly disheveled. His cold, calculating gaze swept across the room, pausing on each of them, on Poirot, on Japp, on Hastings, and finally, on the tomb of Philip Arkwright. Japp wasted no time. His revolver was already drawn, his voice like a whip crack in the still air. Don't move, Graves. Step forward, slowly. But Lucian Graves did not appear rattled. Instead, he descended the steps with a deliberate, almost casual elegance, his hands raised slightly in a mockery of surrender. Really, Inspector? A gun? That seems unnecessary. Poirot stepped forward, his sharp eyes never leaving the solicitor. Unnecessary, Monsieur Graves. But I think not. When a man arrives at the scene of a crime, uninvited and under suspicious circumstances, one must ask, what does he hope to hide? A smirk flickered across Graves's lips. Hide? Monsieur Poirot, if I wished to conceal anything, do you think I would have walked in so boldly? Japp scoffed. Spares the lawyer's talk, Graves. You knew we'd find this tomb, didn't you? Graves tilted his head. his gaze landing on the name Philip Arkwright, etched upon the stone lid. A sigh escaped him, almost as if he were relieved. "Yes," he admitted. "I knew." Hastings bristled. "Then why didn't you say anything before?" Graves's expression darkened. "Because it was not my secret to tell." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And yet, Monsieur Graves, you came here tonight. Perhaps to remove any remaining evidence before we could uncover the truth." A flicker of something, anger, frustration, crossed Graves's face. "You assume too much, Poirot. I came here to confirm my own suspicions, to see whether my fears were correct." Japp sneered. "Your fears? What a load of nonsense. You knew the Philip Arkwright who returned wasn't the real one. You were part of the deception, weren't you?" Graves exhaled, shaking his head. "No. I suspected something was amiss, yes. But I was not the architect of this scheme. That belongs to someone else entirely." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Then tell us, who is behind it?" Graves's mouth opened, but before he could utter a word, there was a sharp crack, a gunshot. The sound echoed through the crypt. Graves jerked forward, clutching his chest, a strangled gasp escaping his lips, before he collapsed to the ground. Japp spun toward the staircase, his gun raised. "Bloody hell, the shooter's up there!" A second shot rang out, striking the stone near Poirot's feet. The Belgian detective remained still, his expression unreadable, even as a bullet narrowly missed him. Hastings, meanwhile, yanked Evelyn Harcourt behind cover, his heart pounding. The shooter was in the chapel above, hidden in the shadows. They had eliminated Graves before he could reveal the final truth. Japp bellowed, "We're sitting ducks down here." Poirot, however, remained eerily calm. He turned his sharp gaze toward the crypt's walls, studying, calculating, deducing. And then, ever so softly, he murmured, "We must force their hand." The decisive trap Hastings watched, as Poirot straightened his jacket and stepped into the open. "Poirot," he hissed, "what are you doing?" But the detective merely adjusted his cuffs, as if he were preparing for an afternoon tea, rather than facing a murderer. "Poor, my dear Hastings," he said, his voice perfectly composed. "This assassin has taken great pains to eliminate witnesses. But their mistake was in underestimating Hercule Poirot." Hastings thought his friend had gone mad. "For heaven's sake, get back." But Poirot was not afraid. Instead, he turned his back to the staircase. An invitation. There was a moment of hesitation, a few beats of silence, and then the murderer took the bait. A third gunshot rang out. But this time, Poirot was ready. He spun at the last moment, and in the same instant, Japp fired towards the source of the attack. The shot struck stone, but it was enough. The figure in the shadows flinched, stumbled, and in that instant, Poirot charged up the steps. A scuffle, a cry, a final thud, and then the murderer lay sprawled at the foot of the altar, disarmed. Hastings rushed forward breathless, his heart hammering as he finally saw the face of the true villain. It was Margaret Clarendon, the elegant widow, always so poised, now lay on the cold chapel floor, her expression a twisted mix of rage and defeat. Her pistol lay just out of reach, her hands trembling as Japp seized her wrists. "You," Hastings breathed in disbelief. "You were behind it all. and Margaret let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Oh, Hastings, don't look so surprised." Chuckle. "Oh, Hastings, don't look so surprised. You should have known. Men always underestimate women." Poirot nodded, his expression almost sympathetic. "Indeed, madam. And yet in the end, it was not your cunning that betrayed you. It was your fear." Jap scowled, securing the handcuffs around her wrists. "Start talking, Lady Clarendon. How long have you been planning this?" Margaret's lips curled into a smirk. "Planning? My dear Inspector, I was merely playing the game better than the rest of you." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Nah, madam. You did not play the game better. You merely believed you had control over every piece. But the truth was always waiting in the shadows, ready to be uncovered." Hastings still looked stunned. But why? Why go through all this trouble? Margaret's smirk vanished. Her eyes hardened, and when she spoke, her voice was pure venom. "Because my husband was a fool. Because he gave away everything to a dead man. And because I was never going to let some impostor take what should have been mine." Jap's eyes narrowed. "So you knew the man claiming to be Philip Arkwright was a fraud?" Margaret nodded. "Of course. But I let him play his little game. I encouraged it. And then, when the moment was right, I killed him." Hastings recoiled. "And Wren, Graves, did you kill them too?" Margaret exhaled, as if bored by the question. "Marcus Wren got too close to the truth. Graves was a loose end." She tilted her head at Poirot. "But you, Poirot, were the only one I never had a tete-a-tete planned for." Poirot gave a slight bow. "I am most flattered, madam." Jap hauled Margaret to her feet. "You're coming with us, Lady Clarendon. The game's over." Margaret let out one last bitter laugh. "Oh, Inspector, the game is never truly over." With that, she was led away. The final reflection as the dawn broke over Clarendon Manor. Hastings watched as Poirot stood on the terrace, gazing out over the grounds. "Another case solved," Hastings said, joining him. Poirot nodded. But tell me, Hastings, what have we learned?" Hastings frowned. "That people will do anything for wealth." Poirot chuckled. But we already knew that, mon ami." "No. What we have learned is something much more interesting." He turned, his sharp eyes twinkling. "That even in a game of shadows, the truth will always find its way to the light." And with that, Hercule Poirot adjusted his cuffs, smoothed his mustache, and walked away, leaving another mystery solved in his wake. Chapter 10. The Final Curtain. The morning sun had just begun to rise over Clarendon Manor, when Hercule Poirot, having settled matters with Inspector Japp, finally allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The case had reached its inevitable conclusion. Lady Margaret Clarendon, in her desperate bid to control her late husband's fortune, had been unmasked as the orchestrator of the entire deception. And yet, Poirot was not entirely satisfied. Something still troubled him. Hastings, ever observant in his own way, took note of Poirot's pensive expression as they sat in the grand drawing-room, sipping their morning tea. "Poirot, you have that look on your face. The one that tells me the case is not quite as closed as we all believe." Poirot smiled faintly, but did not answer immediately. Instead, he set his teacup down with great precision, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle in his sleeve before finally speaking. "My dear Hastings, tell me, what is it that strikes you as most curious about this affair?" Hastings blinked. "Curious? Why, I should think the most curious thing is that Lady Clarendon very nearly got away with everything. If it hadn't been for your clever deductions, Poirot, she might have succeeded in her scheme." Poirot inclined his head slightly. She was clever, perhaps even brilliant. But tell me, Hastings, does it not puzzle you that a woman as shrewd as Lady Clarendon, who manipulated an entire household, who arranged for Philip Arkwright's impostor to inherit everything, would make such an elementary mistake? Hastings frowned. "A mistake?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, mon ami, you have not yet seen it. But it is there, hidden beneath the surface, like a thread left untied in a perfectly tailored suit." Before Hastings could reply, Inspector Japp entered the room, looking uncharacteristically pleased. "Well, Poirot, I must say, we've got her good and proper this time. Lady Clarendon's confessed to everything, helping plant the impostor, killing Marcus Wren, and even finishing off Lucian Graves before he could talk." Poirot murmured. "But what of the real Philip Arkwright?" Japp frowned. "What do you mean? We found his tomb, didn't we? The man's been dead for years." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Yes, so we were led to believe, but I ask you this. If Philip Arkwright perished so many years ago, why was Lady Clarendon still afraid?" Japp gave him a baffled look. "Afraid? She wasn't afraid. She was a woman on a power trip, that's all." Poirot merely shook his head. "Non, mon ami. She was afraid, terrified in fact. Not of discovery, but of something else entirely." Hush settled over the room. Hastings felt a chill creep up his spine. "Poirot, what are you saying?" Poirot leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I am saying, Hastings, that the real Philip Arkwright is alive." "The ghost who walks," Japp scoffed. "That's impossible." "We saw the tomb with our own eyes." Poirot nodded. "Yes, an empty tomb, mon cher Japp." Hastings's eyes widened. "Good heavens! But if Philip Arkwright is alive, then where on earth has he been all this time?" Poirot rose from his chair, walking to the grand window that overlooked the fog-laden estate. His gaze swept across the landscape before finally settling on the dense woods beyond the manor. "Hidden, my friends. He has been hidden?" Japp's face darkened. "Are you saying someone helped him disappear?" Poirot turned back to face them, his expression unreadable. "Or perhaps he disappeared by his own design?" A heavy silence filled the room. "But why?" Hastings finally asked. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Consider this, Hastings. If Philip Arkwright had died all those years ago, why would Lady Clarendon go through the trouble of arranging an impostor? Would it not have been easier to leave the estate in limbo